Thinking back on my fondest memories of college, I did a lot of exciting things and met a lot of people, and every so often I'd remember something different, maybe more interesting and even a little random, but for the most part it was a fun and inspiring time. So I made this one friend Sebastian during my studies, and we'd often catch up at lunchtime and after hours, and we'd talk a lot and do things, and for the most part he was really polite and normal. He'd reminisce sometimes about his childhood in a small German village, going on hiking trips with his brother, and even starting a new life here. I found him interesting and easy to talk to, but sometimes a little dry and boring. Like his squeaky clean image had never got him into trouble, like he'd never had a rebellious moment in his life, and we'd laugh and joke about it, but sometimes I think it secretly offended him. It was the afternoon one day, and I asked him if he'd ever been rebellious or done anything daring in his teens, and he seemed reluctant at first to talk about it, but he still opened up. He said starting in an American high school was difficult, and he didn't meet a lot of people early on, but he met two boys on his morning walks to school, and they had some classes together and sometimes walked the same way home. One day they asked if he wanted to do something cool, and he soon said yes and went along with them. They walked together down a different street and past a few houses, stopping in front of a particularly run-down old house with long grass, broken stairs, and most of the windows covered up. The boys each grabbed some rocks and smirked at each other. Without much hesitation they started throwing the rocks at the front door and onto the roof, making loud animal sounds and shouting insults as if they knew somebody lived there. They stopped and said he should do it too because the freak lived here. Sebastian looked unsure and a bit shaken at first, but he didn't want to look cowardly in front of his new friends and sheepishly picked up a few rocks before throwing them at the house. The boys howled and laughed, and he left with them. Not long afterwards he was back home and feeling a little ashamed at what he'd done. The next morning the boys met at the usual spot and started on their way to school again. Noticing Sebastian was a little quieter than usual, one of them said, "Don't feel bad for the freak, he's a total retard, the world rejected him and so should you." He forced out a laugh and said he was just feeling sleepy. After returning home that day he still felt bad and looked in his parents' cupboard and fridge, feeling like he should try and be kind and offer something to the man living in the rundown old house. He retraced his steps and found his way back to the house he'd first seen yesterday and slowly walked through the front yard littered with old newspapers, stopping at the front door and considering if he should knock or just leave it there. He knocked a little first, but nobody answered, and he took a peek through the small gaps where the windows hadn't been completely covered. He waited a few seconds and almost left before he heard what sounded like soft wailing noises coming from inside. By now Sebastian's curiosity had gotten the better of him and he started looking for a way in. Going around the side of the house he noticed the back door was partly opened and slowly walked up. Peering slightly through the door gap he pushed it open and tried calling out. Again there was no response, and he was shocked by how derelict the interior of the house was and tried listening for the wailing noises more. He got closer to the noise and peeked around the corner into what used to be a children's playroom. He noticed someone standing in the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. He felt terrified at what the man's appearance might be, and he knew now he shouldn't have wandered inside. He let out a faint hello and with every bit of himself tried not to look scared. The man suddenly stopped crying and slowly turned around, his eyes beginning to line up with his own. Without a second thought he reached inside his pocket and pulled out a sharp-looking object. Not having enough time to think, the man lunged at him with the object pointed directly at him. Sebastian tried to dodge him but wasn't quick enough, catching the end of the sharp object on his face a little and drawing blood on his ear. He could only defend himself enough to push the man hard into a wall, and with that he bolted outside the house and ran all the way home, not looking back. I wasn't sure whether to believe his lame attempt at a scary story until he turned his head so his ear was facing me. He bent his ear so I could see the back of it. Sure enough, there it was, a long white scar where the man had cut him. After that I didn't make fun of him again.